journalists are becoming, I think, personalities, if you like. I'm very much old school in the sense that I don't like to see the reporter when they do an interview. There is a place for people, for journalists and for social media influencers, and there is a place for them to be. The whole window of the world was opened when social media was invented. Look at Fabrizio Romano, who has made an absolute empire out of speculation and contact.
Thanks for listening to the latest Beyond the Back Four podcast, available on YouTube and all podcast platforms. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode.
Welcome back to Beyond the Back Four. In this episode, we're diving into part 2 of our conversation with former Sky Sports news reporter Alan Myers. Alan takes us inside how football media has evolved over the past 3 decades, from the days of the Mersey Mafia and player pranks to the era of social media, image rights and journalists becoming personalities themselves. It's a fascinating look at how the relationship between clubs, players and the press has transformed and what it means for the future of sports journalism. Let's get back to it, shall we? Here's Alan Myers.
Just for people that are a little bit younger than, let's say, the 3 of us, how different is the football landscape today to at this point that we're talking about?
Well, funny enough, I've just recorded a podcast. I do a podcast called the Added Time Podcast, and I've just done one with a couple of my co-presenter is Tony Grant, who was an Everton player, played for Manchester City and Burnley as well, and I was with him at the club at the same time, and we were just talking about this, and when I left Everton in 2002, just before David Moyes arrived. I left and I went to Sky. I was there for sort of 12 years or so, and went back to Everton in 2013, and someone said to me, what was the difference like in that 12 years? How had the club changed? How had football changed? And I always remember this moment that 4 senior players came in to my office. The first thing I had to do in the first week when I came back to Everton in 2013, and even that's sort of 12 years ago now, and they came in with briefcases. And they opened up and they had these contracts of image rights and commercial, contracts that they had that we had to agree with and adhere to. And when I left Everton in 2001, I had Paul Gascoigne trying to insert a window wiper off my car somewhere he shouldn't have inserted it, and that is very much, in those days, players would come into training, even as little, as far as near back as 2001, players would come in and train in the morning. They'd have a bit of lunch and they'd go home. Whereas now I think players are business people, really. They have so much more to think about, so much more to do, especially with the onset of social media now, So yeah, it's changed, and football has changed. I mean, football from my day, has really changed in many ways. But and journalism has changed as well. I mean, when I think back when I first joined Everton as press officer, we had on Merseyside, and Graham might know about these. We had a thing called the Mersey Mafia, which were all the sort of what you would call the Fleet Street journos, who were the regular, big papers, and they would pretty much run the place. They walked where they want. They just come into the training grounds, hang around in the car park, and wait for players to come out. I mean, you can imagine that now; it just wouldn't happen. And I always remember when we signed Paul Gascoigne, and it sounds like I'm ancient, but it was the start of the internet, if you like, and we just got our first club website. So of course we were going to have the exclusive of Paul Gascoigne signing for Everton on this, and we put it out about sort of 2 minutes before the press conference started. And I won't name names, but one of the senior journalists from one of the big newspapers actually offered me out in the car park, because I'd taken this exclusive from them, and and it was crazy, I mean, that was a madness of the time, and but that was the change of the way football is reported and people give the news out, and I mean, it was very much a closed shop at that point, but not so much now.
And I remember, if I can tell a story, so I remember when I first met Al, it was very much similar time back in the noughties, and the internet wasn't really in full flow. And at the time I was arranging Q&As with all the local reporters. You probably won't remember, Al, and I had to come through yourself. It was Vinnie O'Connor I had to come up and do.
Yes.
and you had the big Cheshire. It was in Cheshire Hill, was it, where they had the big studio?
Wilmslow it was.
And I had to come up there because it was like I remember coming in. I did Rob Dorset in Birmingham and Pete Colley at the time, and like, what's this about? A Q&A online? What's this about? And I remember coming in and doing it, and it was fascinating. And it's taken off, especially Sky. It's taken off so much since then. And even in the Everton days, Al, you won't remember. I was at Planet Football, who were employed, and it was a strange one this time because at the time Everton employed a third party to run the website or host it. And everything, but that's how things have changed so quickly, Al, haven't they, in the last few years?
I mean, it's ridiculous, really. I mean, myself and Mark Rowan, actually, who is now sort of chief director of comms at the EFL. I mean, he was my assistant, and we would do the website, we would do the media on a match day and whatever. We would do the radio Everton, we would do TV Everton, we would do a magazine called the Evertonian, and we would do it all. It was like 2 or 3 of us at the most, and it was just crazy. And now, I mean, I was at Goodison. I was at Hill Dickinson yesterday, and I look around and you see the amount of staff in the media departments, and not just Everton, but it's every club, and there's tons of these people, and I wonder what they're all doing, but I'm sure they've all got, jobs to do. But fascinating, and it really has changed, and I think it's changed for the better in many ways, but obviously you get a little bit sentimental about those days. I mean, we've been talking today about different players and Paul Gascoigne and people like that, coming through, and it's I mean, you look back with a fondness, but yeah, it wasn't always perfect then, but we did have a good time.
You mentioned all the staff and not knowing what they were doing, but you were at one point head of comms for Everton, weren't you?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I mean, originally in 95, 96 season, Everton had just won the cup, the FA Cup with Joe Royle, and I got the job basically just after that. So they haven't had a trophy for 30 years. So you know who to blame now. I mean, I got. They'd never had an actual press officer as such. They had people who'd done the sort of job, but not an official title, press officer. So it was all new at the time. I mean, there was only me, Claire Tomlinson was at Arsenal, and there was a guy called Paul Mace who was at Leicester, and there was another guy who was at, strangely enough, at Huddersfield. And I don't know whether Huddersfield were innovative at the time, but I can't remember his name. Dale
Tempest, who went to Sky Bet.
He went to Sky Bet, yeah. And Dale was the only one from not in the Premier League, if you like, and it was a great guy. And so it was all we started a press officers club in the day, back in the day. And I mean, it's crazy to think about it now. And, so I wasn't exactly director of comms in those days. It was more a sort of press officer job, making sure that we look after going down to, and of course you would get, you'd have moments where I remember getting a phone call off a journalist, and he said, "Can we interview both players?" And I said, "What players?" So he said, "The 2 new players." And I said, "I don't know anything about the 2 new players." And it was Mitch Ward and Carl Tyler had come from Sheffield United, and Howard Kendall had signed them, not told me, and all of a sudden the press are down at the training ground interviewing 2 players that I never. So you'd have frustrations like that. It wasn't the same as it is now, but no, when I went back in 2013, I was more of a director of comms, where you would look at the whole strategy of the club and the PR. It wouldn't just be from a media point of view, it'd be how the club is seen and what sort of cultural message you want to put out there as well. So it's much more in depth, if you know what I mean. It's a bigger job. But yeah, I enjoyed both times. It was great to work for your boyhood club, isn't it?
Graeme, do you think football is continuing on that mad path of change, or do you think things are more settled now?
I think the clubs, they're all looking to do various things. All the separate video departments now, unheard of back in the day. TikTok channels coming in and stuff like that. I think they're always trying to get in touch with the fans, I guess, is their premise and what they'll allude to. But there's different. The thing with doing that is there's different age categories as well. Sam, I'm sure Alan will say, where trying to get in touch with us 40 pluses is very different to try and get in touch with the teenagers, so there has to be different aspects of the communication from the club, very different to how it was. But there are, the different generations now who follow football so much you do have to have these different areas within the club as well.
I've been also being a director at Blackburn, I went in as director of comms, but ended up signing flyers and doing all kinds of things, buying the new, deciding on the new kit, and it wasn't expected when I went in, that's for sure. But I did, and you look at, and I think a PR guy or a director of comms, whatever you want to call him, they earn their money when things are bad. It's very easy to be a PR man. It's very easy to be a comms director when things are going well. But when things are difficult times, and I'm certainly Blackburn, I've had them over the last number of years. That's when. So I love that challenge. I because I'm a football fan, and I think people over complicate communication and engagement with football fans. The clubs I've felt, not just the ones I've worked for, but also ones I've gone in from a Sky point of view and from BBC point of view, and I found that they almost fear their fan base. Instead of just engaging with them, and because you have to accept straight away that you're not going to agree all the time. The fans are not going to be happy with you. I mean, I walked into Everton in 2013, and the first job they gave me was to sort out a debacle over a new badge. They brought out this new badge, and they had a 25,000 strong petition against it. Now, that was my first job, and you think, okay, how do I mean, in the end, I had to come up with a badge which had everything on, because nothing else was going to please the fans at that point. So that's the badge you've got today, which is the one which is I mean, the reason they changed it was for the digital era, where it was so much more simplified lines, and it was to do with, putting it on digital platforms. But in the end, we ended up with a much more complicated one because they hadn't handled the whole process. I mean, I think the biggest mistake they made, the club, was they said, here's your new badge. What do you think about it? Well, you either say, here's your new badge, that's it, or tell me what you want from your new badge. You can't ask them after it, So, and listen, it happens. But yeah, so, I mean, so it's about listening, as far as that job is concerned. It's about, trying to understand the fans' point of view, and that you won't always agree. And sometimes you have to lead. I see a lot of this talk nowadays where people say, the fans should be represented on the boards and things. If fans were being really honest, they don't want to run the football club. They can't run the football club, most of them, So just be a fan, but demand that the people who do actually run the football club run it properly. And that's for me is the perfect way forward.
Here's a question for the pair of you. With the evolution of the media as it has been, journalists are now, the profile of the journalists themselves has raised. So do you think that, do you think football fans trust sports journalists less because there are now more of them and a wider variety of what gets considered a sports journalist? So like someone who is a journalist at Sky Sports who, let's say, has a degree in journalism, could be considered by the average fan the same as someone who is like a fan journalist on like a club-specific YouTube channel. And so do you think everybody gets put in sort of the same pot, and therefore fans trust journalists less across the board?
Yeah, I guess, there is that. Obviously, so I went through the journalist degree and then to Sky, and obviously, again, had a wonderful time at Sky. I used to love interacting with the TV guys. We used to do the online stuff, so we were interacting with TV guys who like Vinny or Connor and Davy Craig. We're feeding those lines in, and we had to try and time it at the same time. So we had to get it all. Like I remember the Andy Carroll one, that late night. Al, that was a fantastic night, wasn't it? And they were making sure that, don't do it before I wasn't. It was brilliant. But in terms of the modern day, yeah, I'm not going to disparage anyone, Sam, because I did it the old-fashioned way, and Al did it going through radio. We did it a route that took a long time, and the immediacy of today's media. Why wouldn't you have journalists who become immediate as well? I still do it the old-fashioned way. I've got contacts I've known for 20 years who I ring up every week, etc. Same as Al does. We do it sort of knocking on the door the old-fashioned way. We ring them up and your sources. And in some ways, I'm actually glad that the new media don't do it that way, because they're not really disempowering me that way. But there's just new ways of doing it, Sam. They have I would say they've got the ears of the modern fan, so to speak. But there's more. There's so many different ways to get in touch with the fan base, and there's that many different channels for them that they can choose. If they want to believe people like me and Al, great. If they want to believe other people, great. You're having that opportunity, having the discourse with them as well. It's just so different nowadays. But hey, each to their own. I say, it's old fashioned, but each to their own.
Journalists are becoming, I think, Sam, to allude, the point you were alluding to, they are becoming personalities, if you like, now, which is nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm very much old school in the sense that I don't like to see the reporter when they do an interview. I don't think anybody wants to see the reporter. I don't think anyone cares about the reporter. You want to hear from the person who you're interviewing, and so we have the old two-shot, and we seem to have gone back to that now in television, where, I always felt in my interviews, I don't care about what I say. I mean, obviously, you've got to listen. That's the thing which journalists just don't do now. They don't listen, and sometimes things will be missed because an interviewee will say something and they won't pick up on it because they'll have a list of questions that they want to do. But that's me, but there is a place for people, for journalists and for social media influencers, and there is a place for them to be. I know that. It's uncomfortable for me because that's not where I'm from. That's not how I've learned the job. But that doesn't mean that's right. All this TikTok and Instagram and all these things, I'm not across those as well as I should be, and I don't think I ever will be. But that doesn't mean that's not right. I mean, that's the way you have to move with the times. And if that's the way people, I mean, I don't think, you look at some of the figures from social media and whatever, and people are now watching a lot of their media on tablets, on phones, and, as they're moving around, they do it in their own time, such as podcasts like this. Plenty of people will watch this maybe in 3 weeks' time, when they get round to it, and that's great. I think more from the sort of, the mainstream media, I think we've lost a little bit in the fact that we don't have that. It's a little bit more. I think it was Oscar Wilde said, didn't he? Journalism is about asking questions which somebody else doesn't want to answer. The rest of it is PR, and I think we do have a lot of PR now. I'm responsible for it myself. On a lot of occasions, but that's it. It's more of an entertainment business now, I think, rather than a journalistic. There's not that. I mean, there was a time when we talked about the Mersey Mafia earlier. They would be feared by managers and players, when they came to the training ground. There's not really a lot of that now. I think it's so controlled. And also, those same journalists now are coming with a different outlook, and a different way of working, So, but it is what it is. You move with the times and you accept it. It doesn't mean anything's bad or anything's not bad. Right.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Where we now know that the power was with the journals at one point, but now it's gone full circle, hasn't it? Where the clubs are, as we know, feeding certain journals with the publicity, with the fan base that come with them, to the detriment of I'm not going to bemoan it, but to the detriment of some of us who put a bit more work in. And it's almost come full circle, hasn't it? The way that goes on now.
It has, and I think what has helped as well, what has changed is that players and managers and clubs to a large extent, because of social media now, they have their own say, if you like, whereas that never necessarily happened before. Certainly from players' point of view, if a player's not happy with it, I mean, how many times now do we see a player put somebody right, and a journalist says something, they'll go on their social media site and say, actually, you're wrong, that's not the way it is. I saw it not long ago with Ashley Young. Somebody said something about a contract with him and he put it right. So they have that power now, whereas maybe back when I started, that wouldn't have been the case. You would have the club would have it with a local journalist probably, but that was it. But yeah, I mean, you have lost a bit of control, I think. But everyone has I mean, the whole window of the world was opened when social media was invented, and that'll never be closed again now. That's it. It's open for life, so everybody is a journalist in some respects, and, you see people, I mean, look at Fabrizio Romano, who has made an absolute empire out of speculation and contacts. You're right, though, Graham. I mean, contacts will always be king in my world. If you know somebody at the top of a club or even just in a club, that's where you will always have the upper hand. I think on any social media influencer if you have those contacts and that there's still an element is the bigger your organization, the more contacts you're going to have.
Do you think the line between objective reporting and offering an opinion has blurred slightly now in the world of journalism because of all of the differences that you've just talked about?
Yeah, you don't get virtually everything now is an opinion from journalists, and I'm guilty of it myself now. You get on your social media sites and you start, and I try very hard because I've always been, we had the recent. It was an interesting case, really. We had the thing with the Everton takeover, and I remember saying at the time when 777 came in, who subsequently we found, are now in charges and things, and things not seem right in that. But I remember saying at the time, look, let the process take place, let it run its course, because if they are right to get the club, they'll get the club. If they're not, they won't get the club. And I got quite a bit of stick on social media, because people were putting stuff out about, and I'm absolutely all for investigative journalism. It's a really important part, and some of the work that was done over that particular story was fantastic. There was a number of different sources who really did get some really good information and warned, fans about it. But at the same time, I believe that you have to, because you would have chaos if you don't. You have to allow that to run its course. So I'm very much someone who likes to. It's like with Tom Hicks. I allowed him to speak. Whatever he says, he lives and dies by. But I never ever tried to put my take on it. I've had many an opinion which I've never expressed. Because I don't believe that's a journalist's job. I believe a journalist's job is to bring the news to people and report both sides of a story, whether they agree with it or not. That I think has gone now, and even sort of the top, the top journos who are classed as the top journos, even they now are literally run with opinion, and I think the game is a little bit less, lessened because of that. But it is. As I said before, social media has created that environment. That's what everybody has an opinion now. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're, an influencer, whether you're a fan, whether you can have that opinion, and it's where we are. You have to deal with it and get on with it.
I have one final question for you. For young and aspiring sports journalists that are listening to this, that will have been gripped by your stories, what is the one piece of advice you would give them?
Well, it's a good one, this. I mean, there's not really one piece of advice as such, but what it's, I think two things I'd say. One is to be honest, to be straight, and to never try to, we called it stitch people up, back in the day, but it's not quite as crude as that. But never try to be clever, because I think managers and players know that, they've heard it all before. So I think if you try to do that, I think any manager worth his salt or worth her salt will answer a question straight if they feel that the person asking it is being genuine. And I think I've always sort of got on because of that. I think, even though I say so myself, I've always tried to be straight with people and ask a simple guy. I remember it didn't happen with Glenn Hoddle once, where he took my question completely wrong, but and gave me a mouthful. So there's that. But also, I think what's important is to respect yourself, because this business people will always tell you, managers will always tell you, players will always tell you, other journalists will always tell you that what you're saying is wrong, or what you're saying, is you shouldn't be asking that, or you should, and they'll sort of dampen down your, they'll disrespect is a bit strong, but they will try and lessen your importance. Respect your job, respect your your profession, and expect that back, because everybody will be trying to not give you that respect back, and that's really important, I think.
Alan, thank you so much. If you are watching on YouTube, please make sure you are subscribed. If you're listening on any podcast platform of your choice, make sure you're subscribed as well. Give us a follow, and we'll be back looking beyond the back four.
Thanks for listening to the latest Beyond the Back Four podcast, available on YouTube and all podcast platforms. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode.